this house, in a secret room, lie thousands of photographs of naked women. They weren't taken by some underground photographer. They were taken by the master of the house, the chief caricaturist of the British Empire, Linley Sambourne. By day, he ridiculed the nation's vices. By night, he secretly documented his own. This house was his greatest lie. Every vase, a scream for status. Every unpaid bill, a whisper of desperation. Today, we call this a personal brand built on credit. But imagine if your Instagram was a real brick-and-mortar house and you couldn't leave. We will unseal the financial diaries of the artist's wife, hidden for decades, to discover the true cost of illusion. It all began in 1874 with a deal at the altar, a deal that turned the artist into a debtor before he even crossed the threshold of his new home. There are houses you don't enter. You seep into them, like fog under a door. The air here doesn't move. It has frozen, become an artifact, thick, heavy, like unshed tears. It smells of coal dust, withered roses, and the most terrifying scent in the world, the smell of trapped time. Every step is a desecration. The parquet floorboards moan underfoot, complaining of the intrusion. This isn't the creak of old wood. It's the voice of oblivion. In a beam of light breaking through the heavy stained glass, dust dances. But this isn't just dust. It's the ash of burned ambitions, the remains of forgotten evenings, and words that were never spoken. Look around. The gas sconces on the walls, glass lungs that no longer breathe, the vials on the dressing table, their contents long evaporated, leaving only the ghost of a scent and stains on a silver lid. This is not a museum. It is a crime scene. There is no body, no signs of a struggle. The victim here is an entire era, killed by the illusion it created for itself. Every object in these rooms is a piece of evidence. Here, the heavy velvet curtains, designed to hide not just the light from the street, but the truth. Here, the Chinese porcelain on the mantelpiece, its cold gleam meant to reflect success, but it only reflects the emptiness opposite. How did this house, where every detail was a cry of deafening victory, how did it become this mausoleum of quiet, methodical desperation? How did this stage, built to display triumph, become a repository for evidence of surrender? In this silence, they are still here, ghosts on a stage that has outlived its actors. Him, Edward Linley Sambourne, the architect of this silence, a man who built walls not of brick, but of his own vanity. His presence is in every scratch on the writing desk, in every sketch that stares from the wall with reproach. He wanted the house to speak for him, and the house did speak, but not at all what he had planned. And her, his wife, Marion, the chief accountant of his vanity. Her shadow glides through these rooms, her fatigue woven into the pattern of the carpet. She was the mistress of this theater, responsible for ensuring the gilding on the sets never tarnished. In her diaries, hidden for decades, lies the true financial statement of this production. The cost of every dinner party, every new dress, every sigh of relief when another bill was paid. This house is not a witness, it is an accomplice. It watched as ambition turned to fear, as love became a debt obligation. How the facade they so carefully constructed for the world slowly became the walls of their personal prison. The walls here don't talk. They pass judgment. And we have come here to hear it. 1874. The air doesn't smell of orange blossoms. It smells of a deal. Two people stand at the altar. He is Edward Linley Sambourne, a young caricaturist with the eyes of a predator and empty pockets. His greatest asset is not money, but the sharply honed knife of his talent and an immense, hungry vanity. He is a man who knows how to see the cracks in the facades of great men and transfer them to paper. Now, He wants to build his own facade, without a single crack. She is Marian Herapath, the daughter of a stockbroker, quiet, well-bred, with a dowry that rang louder than any wedding march. Her father, Spencer Herapath, was a man who heard the pulse of the city in the ticking of the stock ticker. He knew the price of everything, and especially the price of a sound investment. And this marriage was exactly that, an investment. This is not a union of hearts. It is a merger of assets. His ambition and her money. His name and her financial cushion. In this church, they are not just exchanging rings. They are signing an unwritten contract. He gets the seed capital to build his empire. She gets an artist husband, a fashionable accessory for a Victorian drawing room, a ticket to the bohemian world that so enticed the daughters of industrialists. The ink that signs this union is her father's money, and the first clause of this contract is executed immediately. No pause for a honeymoon, no time to get used to their new names. The first order of business, a purchase, a house. Number 18, Stafford Terrace, £2,000 sterling. A sum his pen couldn't have earned in a decade. A sum that instantly transforms him from a free artist into a debtor. He hadn't even hung his hat on the hook, and he was already up to his ears in obligations. This house was not their cozy nest. It was their firstborn, conceived not of love, but of calculation. A hungry, newborn beast that demanded to be fed from the very first day. This house wasn't his home. It was stone collateral. Collateral to prove to his powerful father-in-law that he, a man from the middle class, an impostor with no education, was a worthy match, a worthy investment. Every swing of his hammer, every vase he bought, every guest who crossed the threshold was a report to an invisible investor. The deal at the altar was sealed. He had bought himself a stage with someone else's money, and now he was doomed to play the leading role on it until the very end, to prove he was worthy, to prove it until he himself believed the illusion, or until it crushed him. A man with no pedigree and no diploma must speak louder than others. But Linley Sambourne was cleverer. He decided not to speak. He decided to build a structure that would scream for him, to scream about his taste, his intellect, his right to be here among titans and lords. He wasn't building a house. He was forging armor for himself, a brick armor against his main, eternal enemy, obscurity. He was an imposter, and he knew it. A self-taught engineer who had entered high society through the back door of a satirical magazine. And now, having received the money, he began a war for status. And this house on Stafford Terrace became his fortress. Style was chosen as a weapon, the aesthetic movement, not just a fashion. It was a password, a philosophy, a cult of beauty, accessible only to the initiated. It was an act of self-defense, a rejection of the loud, vulgar luxury of the nouveau riche in favor of dark, complex hues and exquisite materials. The walls were dressed in the patterns of William Morris, not because they were beautiful, but because they were a code for entry into a private club where the language of refinement was spoken, where a single glance at the pomegranate pattern separated us from them. Every swirl on the wallpaper whispered to the guest, "The master of this house is one of us. He understands." He brought the Orient into his home, not as a traveler, but as a conqueror of cultural codes. Chinese porcelain the color of a peacock's feather. Japanese screens, where behind every curve of a cherry blossom branch lay centuries of wisdom. These objects did not decorate the space. They built a line of defense against accusations of tastelessness. Every object was a soldier in his personal army, proving his erudition. And then he delivered the masterstroke. stained glass, but not bought, not commissioned from a master, created from his own designs. This was his manifesto, fused into the glass. Every ray of light passing through it was fractured, coloring the air with the hues of his genius. It was a message, burned by the sun onto the drawing room floor. I am not just a caricaturist. I am a creator. The creator of this world is I. Every detail was calibrated, every vase, every frame, every piece of drapery. This was not an interior. It was meticulously crafted propaganda, a broadcast of one simple but vital message. I am an aesthete. I am a gentleman. I belong. The fortress was complete. Its walls were thick. Its colors were deep. Its silence was eloquent. It looked out on the world with arrogance, ready to repel any attack. But Sambourne forgot the cardinal rule of all armor. Armor protects, but it also confines, and it comes at a very high price. The armor is cast, the stage is set, but behind the scenes, another play begins, without applause, without an audience, a play written in cold numbers in a thick, leather-bound book. When the guests departed, when the echo of laughter faded into the heavy drapes, and the only thing left in the air was the scent of cooled wax and the ghost of cigar smoke, the true life of this house began. It began with the scratching of Marion Sambourne's pen as she bent over the account book. This is not just a ledger. It is a battlefield, the holy scripture of their fear. On these pages, filled with her neat handwriting, a war was waged, a war between appearance and reality. Linley Sambourne's annual income at the very peak of his career as the chief cartoonist for Punch reached £1,500, a huge sum for an artist. But for this house, it was mere crumbs. This house was an eternally hungry beast. It had its own insatiable metabolism. It devoured coal for the fireplaces. It drank gas for the hundreds of lamps. It demanded wages for the cook, the maid, the scullery maid. It consumed taxes. Nearly half of Sambourne's annual income was burned in the furnace of this house before a single loaf of bread was even bought. And Marion was the high priestess of this cult. Each entry in her book is not just an expense. It is another nail hammered into their gilded cage. A new outfit for the reception at Lord Leighton's, £5. Wine for the dinner party, £10. Roof repair, £20. The cold arithmetic of ink mercilessly recorded the price of their ambition. Each new turn of progress became another turn of the debt spiral. The installation of a telephone in 1888 was not a convenience, but a new bill to be paid. A metal spider on the wall, weaving a web of new social obligations. Electricity, installed in 1901, was not light, but a new, bright, and merciless spotlight, illuminating every crack in their facade and emptying their wallet. Marion's diaries scream this silently, between the lines about visits and the weather. Sammy is worried about the bills again. This phrase repeats like a prayer of despair. His fear was another permanent resident of this house, the cold sweat on the brow of an artist who understood that his hand, which created caricatures of the powerful, had to work non-stop simply to feed the walls within which he lived. This house was not a cozy nest. It was a debtor's pit, artfully draped in silk and velvet, a gilded altar demanding daily sacrifices, and they made them again and again, smiling at their guests, while in the silence of the study, the beast named Respectability devoured their future, penny by penny. In the drawing room, flooded with the deathly glow of gas lamps, another act of the grand play unfolds. Laughter like the chime of breaking glass, the rustle of silk, the sense of expensive perfumes and French dishes mingle with the faint scent of anxiety, Here, they feast. They feast among the bills. Behind the facade of a glittering social life, behind the visits of lords, actresses, and writers, the walls absorb another invisible drama. The golden cage proves to be a trap, and each of its inhabitants plays their part in the tragedy. Look at the master of the house, Linley Sambourne. He is witty, he is brilliant. His caricatures are discussed in Parliament. But here, in his own home, he looks at his own son, Roy, and sees the greatest defeat of his life, a living embodiment of failure. The boy who was meant to be the heir to a dynasty of taste and talent turned out to be a disappointment, without ambition, without a spark, expelled from schools, having found refuge in the faceless routine of the army. Every time Roy entered the room, he was a silent reproach to his father, a reminder that he had failed in his most important project, his own blood. And the mistress, Marian, as perfect as her Chinese vases, always with a smile, always ready to sustain a conversation. But when the guests leave, the smile crumbles from her face like old guilt. Her body is another battlefield, chronic pain, neuralgia, waves of dark, viscous depression. She is the main mechanism of this theater, one that is working itself to ruin. Her diaries are not only accounts, but also a chronicle of her slow decline under the pressure of having to be flawless. The house that should have been her pride became her executioner, demanding strength she no longer had. But the greatest secret of this house is not locked in a safe. It is hidden on the top floor, in the Holy of Holies, the master's study. By day, it is the workshop of a respectable artist. But at night, when the house sleeps, it transforms into something else. Here, amidst the smells of chemicals and turpentine, Linley Sambourne leads his second, secret life. Thousands upon thousands of glass negatives, his true, secret passion, photography. He photographs everything, his family, himself in the mirror, politicians for his caricatures, and her, the female nude. Dozens of images, scandalous for Victorian morality. Female bodies, freed from corsets and conventions, frozen beneath his ruthless, scrutinizing gaze. This is not art. It is anatomy, an attempt to dissect the truth that he so carefully draped in his own life. In this house of false bottoms, where the drawing rooms lie about prosperity and the bedrooms are silent about disappointment, the master finds refuge in a double life, a gentleman by day, a voyeur by night, a man who mocks the vices of others on paper while hiding his own on glass. The feast among the bills continued, but each of its participants was poisoned by their own bitter secret. The beginning of the end is not the knock of a bailiff at the door, not a pile of unpaid bills. It is a quiet, barely noticeable rebellion, a rebellion of one's own body. It all began with a tremor, a light, almost invisible vibration in his fingertips. The hand that for decades had held a pen like a scalpel, dissecting the vices of an empire, suddenly ceased to obey. The hand that built this fortress of brick and vanity began to betray him. For Linley Sambourne, this was not merely a symptom of illness. It was a death sentence. His entire life, his entire income, this whole theater he had so meticulously constructed, depended on one single thing: the steadiness of his line. And now, that control was lost. The work that had been his salvation and his weapon turned into a daily torture. Lines that were once confident and sharp became jagged, uncertain. He hid the trembling hand in his pocket. He tried to clench it into a fist, as if he could smother the treacherous tremor. But the rebellion was spreading. This tremor became the physical embodiment of his internal collapse, his entire system, built on the illusion of total control over his career, his family, His image was crumbling. He could no longer draw a steady line. He could no longer maintain a confident facade. Illnesses, like creditors, came to collect their due. Gout, a weakening heart, and this relentless, humiliating tremor that mocked him, turning his greatest gift into a curse. The fear that was once a quiet whisper in Marian's ledgers now became a deafening scream inside his own head. The fear of the future, the fear of becoming helpless, the fear that all his brick armor would crumble to dust from this one internal shudder. In 1910, in his bedroom, surrounded by the things that were meant to symbolize his triumph, he died. The master of the theater had left the stage. The curtain fell not in the auditorium, but in his chest. He lost the war not to debts, not to critics, not to society. He lost the war to his own flesh. The final, most cruel caricature was drawn of himself. The hand that created an empire, in the end, destroyed it, simply by refusing to be steady. The death of the master is not always a liberation for the house. Sometimes it is the beginning of a long, slow agony. When Linley died, and Marian followed 4 years later, the house was not put up for auction. It was not carved up into lots, not sold off piece by piece, as happens with empires that outlive their creators. No, something worse happened to it. It was simply left to die. The children, Roy and Maud, could not or would not let go of the past. They stayed. But they did not live in this house. They took up residence in it, as if in a family crypt, like ghosts, doomed to wander through rooms where every object screamed of those who were gone. They changed nothing. They threw nothing away. Their father's armchair remained by the fireplace, as if he had just stepped out for a moment. Their mother's vials on the dressing table, awaiting her hand. Time in the house stood still. It curled up like old parchment and grew brittle. The house stopped breathing. Rooms began to be locked, one after another. First the parents' bedroom, then the drawing room. The space for the living shrank, yielding to the space for the dead. Behind these locked doors, a slow, quiet catastrophe was unfolding. Dust, like a shroud, settled on the furniture. Sunlight, seeping through cracks in the curtains, bleached the color from the upholstery, leaving pale, ghostly traces. Cobwebs, like mourning veils, stretched across the corners. This was not neglect. It was preservation, an unconscious attempt to embalm the tragedy, to preserve not just the things, but the very air, the very pain, the very silence left after the main actors had departed. The house became a hermetically sealed capsule, a glass snow globe that no one would ever shake again. This was not a quick death at auction, where strangers' hands touch your past. It was a slow lethargy, a dreamless sleep. The house fell into a coma, its heartbeat audible only in the creak of floorboards under the feet of the last living custodians of this mausoleum. For decades it lay like this, under a layer of dust and silence, waiting, not for a resurrection, but for an autopsy. Salvation comes not with a roar, but with the quiet turn of a key in a rusted lock. The Savior's name was Anne, his granddaughter, a woman who looked at this dying house and saw not a ruin, but a relic. She didn't let it dissolve into time. She performed an autopsy. And when the doors, locked for decades, groaned open, the world saw something more than just an untouched Victorian interior. Beneath a shroud of dust, they found no treasure. They found the truth. In the attic, in wooden boxes like coffins, lay the true legacy of Linley Sambourne. Not his drawings, not his photographs, paper. Thousands of bills, letters, diaries, cries for help disguised as accounting entries, confessions of fear, hidden between the lines about social calls. And in that moment, a great paradox was revealed. The gilding on the walls screamed of success, but the papers in the boxes whispered of the cost, and the whisper was louder than the scream. He wanted to go down in history as a great artist, as a man of impeccable taste. But the great masterpiece that immortalized his name was not the firm line of his pen, but the brick walls of his fear, this gilded cage itself. And in this museum, he built for his ego, the final, most honest exhibit turned out to be himself, a man exposed for all to see, not through the formal portrait in the living room, but through every bill for coal, every record of debt, every secret photograph hidden in his study, his soul, dissected and laid out in the display cases of his own home. He thought he was building a monument to himself. He didn't know he was preparing the evidence for his own trial. The stone outlived the man and passed its judgment. This house, conceived as a manifesto of success, became the most honest obituary for its creator. It proved that the walls we build to protect ourselves from the world, more often than not, become the walls of our own personal prison, preserving not the image we wanted to show, but the truth we were trying to hide. What is the cost of the facade we build for ourselves each day? And could it be that one day we'll find the price we pay for the illusion of success is, in fact, our one true, authentic life? We have passed judgment on this house, but the final verdict is yours. Your thoughts are the most valuable echo of this story, and we look forward to hearing them in the comments. If you found this conversation important, your support will help us continue it.